So here we are sitting in Denise, and what we're looking at is our new exciter wire switch. So the alternator, which I was having a problem when I bought this, I thought it was dead. It probably wasn't. I put a new alternator in. The battery is really weak. I haven't bought a new battery yet. It barely holds 12 volts, so when I start the car after it cranks, the alternator is not receiving 12 volts and it will not start producing electricity without 12 volts running through it. I'm not an electrical engineer, so I'm not going to try to explain why that doesn't happen. So there's a terminal on the alternator that is supposed to essentially liven up the alternator, and it's supposed to be receiving 12 volts when the ignition is turned on. There is another lead on the alternator that has constant 12 volts, but that is not what livens up the alternator. So wasn't getting 12 volts at the exciter wire. It was definitely the wire. You know, something was corroded, so it was receiving less than the battery voltage was. You know, if I had 12 volts at the battery, I had, 2 volts at the exciter wire, so something was going on there. If the battery wasn't fully charged, the alternator would not kick on. So what I did was I would jump from the 12 volt constant terminal on the alternator to the exciter wire terminal, and it would start the alternator. And there's some videos on YouTube about this, talking about putting a wire to the exciter terminal with a diode, one-way diode. Well, I guess all diodes are one-way, but a diode so that it wouldn't backfeed. I did not put a diode in this, but I just put a switch in so that I can turn off as soon as I turn it on. It's wired into the cigarette lighter, a little feed for the cigarette lighter. I pulled that off, cut it off, put a new terminal on that has feed for this tapped off on it. Plug it back in. So that's a ignition. That's tied to ignition, so there's no power until we turn the ignition on. And when we turn the ignition on, we got this handy little thing to tell us what our voltage is. So the battery voltage right now is 12.2. After we crank, it may not be 12.2. That's not 12.2 anymore. So now we turn on our switch. Feel it turn on, and I turn it right back off again. Let's see, we got 14.3 now. Alternator's charging. I just turned the switch off, so there's no issue of backfeeding, or I don't know if there even would be. So that's our fix for now. We'll see how it works. Go. So this is Denise's new alternator. This is the exciter wire feed, the factory one. Went on this terminal down here. We don't get 12 volts at this. There's obviously some corrosion down the line. Look at the wiring harness, there's no way I'm going to dig into that. This is the 12 volt constant feed here, and that receives 12 volts for the battery, but it also, that's where the flow to charge the battery goes to. This is the ground. So what I had to do was I had to jump from that terminal to that terminal to get the alternator to start. And then this is the wire we spliced in, and this goes along and through the firewall and to that switch, and to the cigarette lighter where I tied it in. And now we don't have to open the hood every time we want to start the alternator.